Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hajra Kartli and I work at the Multicultural Center as a diversity peer educator. Before we begin, just a short intro for our speaker today. Jasmine Hunt is a program manager at the Institute for Law Enforcement Administration, a division of the Center of American and International Law. Through her experience working within law enforcement education, Jasmine continues to innovate and create safe learning environment to help generate difficult conversations and open dialogue within the policing profession. In 2017, Hunt also became a registered yoga teacher. Jasmine has practiced internationally and across the US and has worked with an array of clients, including student athletes, youths, students, law enforcement officials. Jasmine is heavily rooted in her volunteering work aimed at bringing conflict resolution and wellness education to various at risk youth groups across the city. She obtained her Master's of Art in Conflicts Management and Dispute Resolution from Southern Methodist University in 2013, along with certification in mediation and relations. She received her Bachelor's of Science in International Politics Economy from the University of Texas at Dallas in 2011. I'll let you take over and start along. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I really appreciate that. Um, as they were saying, my name is Jasmine, and I am a program manager at the Institute for Law Enforcement Administration. And I have been working with them for maybe 4 or 5 years, but I've been at the Center for American and International Law for about 8 years now. So this presentation is going to be on multiculturalism, my experiences growing up as a multicultural individual, and just reconciling my identity. And I don't know how many people are on this call who are possibly multi-ethnic, so you may have a lot of similar experiences as me. So I will go ahead and continue on and get to the first slide. And again, this is a little bit of an intro about me. I am a yoga instructor and a program manager. And so a lot of this presentation is going to be about how my experiences as a multicultural individual led me into my career path. And I also talk about just reconciling my ancestral identity and what happened in my family. And again, how did that lead me into my career? So I won't go over this slide too much because you guys have already heard my intro. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see if I can move this slide. Did it freeze? Let's see. Okay, there we go. So this is a little bit about me and the topics that I'm going to talk about today. That's my grandma and my mom. Multi-ethnic identity in adolescence, how our experiences shape our identity, processing ancestral trauma, identities that create career paths, and then just a little bit on the wellness work that I do, because in the intro they mentioned that I teach a course on wellness for law enforcement, performance potential for law enforcement. So those are the topics that I'm going to touch on. So I wanted to start off with this quote by Nina Simone. And she says, I have to constantly re-identify myself to myself, reactivate my own standards, my own convictions about what I'm doing and why. And I think that it's so important that when we are looking at what kind of career paths we want to carve for ourselves, there is a lot of re-identifying ourselves to ourselves and connecting to what it is that we believe in and what it is that we want to put out into the world, or what kind of services that we want to provide for people in our careers or in our projects, our passions. So let me move this over. Looks like I'm gonna have to click on each slide to move it. So this is a little bit about the initial part of my life. How does growing up mixed, as they say, shape our identity? And that's me as a little girl right there, if you can see it. I had a lot of experiences growing up as a multi-ethnic child. I grew up here in Texas, and so it is a lot like being a chameleon. And it's interesting because when you are multi-ethnic, a lot of times you may not present as the actual cultural background that you are. So, for example, sometimes I'm not always African American presenting, sometimes I'm not always Asian presenting. So, you are confronted with a lot of curiosity in the classroom. A lot of times kids will ask you questions, at least that was my experience. They want to know more about you. They want to sometimes even put you in a box. And so for me, it was really difficult because a lot of times I didn't feel like I identified with necessarily either culture, or maybe I didn't feel accepted by um, certain parts of my culture at times. And I really did sort of grow up as like a chameleon, is like what I usually say. But there are a lot of stereotypes and assumptions that are made about multi-ethnic children, or children of color in general. And it's really difficult because at such a young age we don't have the tools, we don't necessarily have the resources to learn how to manage people's expectations of us, or what we who we are as people, because we ourselves have not even explored this realm of ourselves. And so of course there's a lot of bullying and just situations that are very difficult to navigate. So one of the research topics I think would be really interesting going forward is just seeing how our brain development and our mental health is impacted, especially among multi-ethnic children. I think that would be really interesting to know more of. So I put this slide because I really like this slide on acknowledging ancestral traumas, because for me, one of the ways that I reconcile my identity is I like to look at photographs. And as you can see, is my paternal grandmother, and I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but it's there she is. And those are her siblings. And then my paternal grandfather is this person here. And there's my grandmother and my grandfather, as you can see. This happens to be my mom as the baby in the photo. And when you reconcile, you have to accept the past, you have to accept what happened in our history, what happened in our lineages. And there is a sadness, because when you look at photographs, you can see historically what is taking place, or you can imagine what is taking place. For my grandparents, there was a war that took place in the Philippines, and so that's when they immigrated to the United States. And obviously for my grandparents, there was already so much segregation and discrimination happening at those times. The policies and laws in place impacted their lives for the worst. And so one thing I think that is so interesting about these photos is that everyone is smiling except for everyone in this photo here in my paternal grandfather's photograph. And I just think that's so interesting because, the lives that they lived were probably very difficult and challenging. And not to say that the lives that my other ancestors were living were not, but as you can see, being Black and being Black Americans is a totally different experience that I think a lot of people, we sometimes forget. So I like to remember by looking at photographs. And most importantly, it's using this ancestral wisdom to change ourselves for the better. And it allows us to reconcile, what took place and where we want to go in the future. For me, I like to study a lot of epigenetics, so I'll get into that a little bit later. But it is a way to kind of release trauma. So on another note, I'm moving on to this slide here. It's a little bit of a flashback, and these are a little, some happy times. This is my brother here in this photo, and these are my parents. This is my grandmother, and this is their wedding photograph. And it's good to look at photos that do bring you joy. So for me, picture albums and old relics, family gems. Sometimes people have jewelry that they've kept, or old flowers. These are things that I love to look at because they allow you to reconnect. And I'll get into how it kind of goes into finding your career path, but it starts with uncovering and an acceptance and an honesty about what our what our families went through. I leave it on this slide too for a little bit because, as you can see, we come in different shades. So colorism in families it's really heavy stuff, especially for example, like an 8-year-old child whose mother may be a lot lighter. I know that was my experience. So this is really important to consider because when we look at it from a mental health aspect, this can play a part in how we feel about ourselves, our confidence, our ability to walk in the world, or to just feel that we are capable, that we are not defective. These are important things to keep in mind. And we even kind of think about what we were told, what were the messages that we were told growing up in our families, especially as multi-ethnic children. I know for me, in my culture, a lot of parents would tell their kids that it's not good to stay in the sun. You shouldn't, we don't want you to look this way. We don't want you to look dark. My mom was never that kind of mom. And so I think that made a huge impact for me, is that it's the messaging that we're getting. It's the messaging that we tell our children. Um, and also, we look at just the policies that are in place in the world. So not only the messaging we get in the family, in the home, in the family system, but also the messaging given to us by the media and by the policies that are and the laws that are existing in our country. So that's the slide I wanted to talk about from a photograph standpoint. And then this is a slide I put together on a genetic story from a historical perspective. So just to kind of go through it, in the 1700s, we had Filipinos. So I'm half Filipino. So Filipinos first arrived in the United States. And at that time, there were so many things happening, obviously, slavery. Slave patrols were established. That's something that we learn about in law enforcement education when we talk about the history of policing. But at that time, so many families were torn apart and marginalized. And all of this was happening in the United States and all over the world. There were so many countries in the 1800s that were occupied, Guam, Philippines, Palau, just so many islands. It was like a free for all at that time. And in the 1800s, if you look 100 years later, the United States occupied the Philippines, and Asian Americans were beginning to migrate more to the United States, and immediately they were put into work for the Transcontinental Railroad. Any place, I mean, this country was built on the people who immigrated here, and also for those who had been enslaved. Black codes were established. The Ku Klux Klan was formed. Jim Crow laws enacted. Start of segregation, and these are things that I bring this up, and it's hard to talk about it sometimes, but it's necessary because that was the reality of what my family went through. So again, I came from the oppressed upon. I came from the genocided upon. So I have to do that work myself now to reconcile what happened back then, and it's allowed me to open a lot of doors in my career path. So moving on to the 1900s, the end of segregation. At this point, Black Americans, we begin to start protesting. There were so many riots that happened. We were beginning to speak up and stand up for ourselves. And same with the Filipinos, but there was still segregation and discrimination going on. They were barred citizenship in the Loose Seller Act. So like only 100 Filipinos could come to the United States at a time. And there were all of these, but yet people were coming in droves from Europe, immigrating from Europe. So there's, it's out of balance when we look at access and who is able to access opportunity. And then now we're in 2021, and so I wrote down some of the major events that have taken place lately. Stop Asian Hate, crimes against Asian Americans, and of course George Floyd's murder last year. That happened, and so again we have this reminder of where we come from. And I think that when we're in the workplace and when we're looking for a career, we carry these things. We carry these things on a cellular level. We carry them in our DNA, in our genetics, and that's okay to carry that. But I also think it's important for us to reconcile it. I'll tell you a little story about my family. So this is a picture that I took. This is a photograph my grandfather sent me, and I titled it "History Shapes Our Family Legacy." And this, what if you know are reading, because you can see the newspaper clipping, is that in the 70s, sorry, in the 60s, my dad, uh, he was about four, maybe, well, he's about 6 years old here, and his sister was four. They got the ages backwards. And they had a home, and they lived in an all white neighborhood. They happened to move into the neighborhood. And after living there for some time, there was a fire, and it was their home. And at the time, my grandfather wanted to be a doctor. He was going to school. He was already enrolled in graduate school, and they the house was burned down. And when they talked to the fire department said that um, it was a fire that was started by someone. Is it arson? I'm not sure of the term, but regardless, someone burned their home down. And so that affected the generational wealth in my family. Who really knows what could have been if my grandfather had become a doctor at the time he had to quit and pack up all his stuff and move and start all over again. So this plays into my career because there were things that took place back then with law enforcement. Before they left, they were asked to take everything out of their trunk. Everything was rummaged through, and then they were told that they have to clean it all up and basically get out. So that was the experience back then for my grandfather, and I think that's a really important story to tell. And again, when we're looking at when people say this was so long ago, this was such a long time, why can't we move forward? I think it's important that we keep the context and we look at where we were and where we are now and how much time I think is needed for us to have these healing conversations. So this quote, I love this quote. Not only are our ancestors around us as sovereign entities like you and I, they walk within us. We hold their DNA, programmed thoughts, their memories, and their knee-jerk reactions. So I can definitely attest to that. So moving back in on this image of, I love this picture. This is my favorite picture of 2021 because I actually just discovered it through another class that I took. And for any multi-ethnic child, they will tell you that they have experienced either some or all of these situations. A lot of times, I don't know if you can see my mouth, we feel like this, and children of color in particular as well have experienced this absolutely 100%. Maybe they don't feel that they're included in certain classrooms and certain playgrounds. There are things that happen where children are excluded, and that happened to me quite a bit. I think it was because kids don't know how to, they want to be able to connect with you, and if they can't connect with you, then they don't know um, how to interact with you. And so now that has changed a lot because the world has changed, but when I was a kid, it really was like this. And then there's cases where this happens, where you meet other kids that are like you, and so you kind of sit at the same table. Fortunately, I was kind of over here, I guess you could say. So I just wasn't, I sometimes just felt ostracized. And then this can happen where a lot of times this is when you see clubs start popping up in high school, Asian American club, African American, Pan African club, all of those kind of pop up and then they create spaces for us. And I remember when I was in 8th grade, it was Kendall, Trevor, and Jasmine. And Kendall was African American and Hispanic, and Trevor was African American and white, and then I was mine. And so we all kind of had our little club, I guess. And so this is the ultimate goal: inclusion and diversity. We want more diversity, and again, like I'm saying, is that as a multi-ethnic person, you're going to experience some of these, and even as women. whether you're multi-ethnic or not, if you're Black, Indigenous, person of color, everybody have experienced this at some point or another, everybody. So that's something I think that you guys should take a look at. Yeah, so let me move on. Let's take a check on time to make sure I'm on time. Okay, so when we have attitudes towards people or associate stereotypes with them without our conscious knowledge, that is what we call implicit bias. And I like that definition here, because that's something that happens quite a bit, especially in my experience. People will associate you one way or another. If I look more Asian in this setting, then I'm accepted. If in one culture I'm light skinned, the other culture I'm considered dark skinned. So there's all these different stereotypes and things that we're trying to manage and navigate through, and it's very difficult. Can we just all accept each other? Maybe that would be easier. So let's move into kind of the difference between the two cultures, the cultural experiences, and we call this having the talk. And most Black families will know about this talk, and they have it every day, really, with their children before they go to school or they drive off somewhere. And a lot of this talk is about what to do when we're pulled over by the police, what to do when we're walking into a store, how do we hold ourselves up in society every day just walking down the street. I remember my dad would tell my brother and me, when you're pulled over, it's yes sir, no sir, keeping your hands on the steering wheel, don't reach around, make sure you tell them that you're going to reach for something if you reach for something. Your appearance, my dad would always tell us no sagging, and you have to make sure that suit and tie, and make sure he would cut my brother's hair. My brother never wanted his hair cut. Now he now has longer hair than me, but it was one of those things that my dad was really worried for us. And then just the verbal and nonverbal. When you're walking out of a store, have the receipt in your hand. Don't touch things. I mean, I remember my dad would tell us, don't touch anything in the store because you don't want someone thinking that you're stealing it. And these are conversations that are had every day. And so that's the programming I've grown up with. And so it's really hard to raise kids under those situations, but you do it out of survival. And the same thing with my mother's side, being on the Asian side, my mom, there's this expectation of model minority, that you're intelligent, that you put your head down and you just work and you don't cause trouble. The social barriers, and then just sometimes the shame that's associated with having a parent that's an immigrant, that doesn't speak English or doesn't understand nuances, the nonverbal communication, or understand jokes. Sometimes there's a lot of shame associated with that, and I've seen that in television shows where kids write off their parent because they don't speak the same language. So these were things that I was dealing with, and it's heavy stuff, handling, so again, two cultures have been oppressed, and then now we're having to navigate that. Here's a slide in 2020. So the ethnically diverse group, as you can see, two or more races, 36%. It's the largest change from 2010 to 2020. So there's a lot of fusion happening in our country right now, and Generation Z is coming in, and we have the generations after them, and it's only going to get more diverse. And so we have to have resources and policies in place for us. By 2060, again, about 6% of the total population are projected to be multiracial. And here's another graph here. The child population, as you can see, under the age of 10 in this orange, there's quite a bit, two or more, and then over 80, very, very little, as you can see. And then, of course, our Hispanic population growing, Asians, everybody is intermixing. So here is a photo of me in the work that I do. So as you can see, the reason why I talk about history and culture and understanding where we are in our spaces and how we were impacted by our childhood, I really felt compelled to go into a space of wellness. So I got my yoga teaching certification in 2017, but I've been practicing yoga for about a decade now. And I've used my degrees and my experience in nonprofit education, and I took what I've learned, and now I'm able to use those experiences in the workplace and use it for good. And a lot of what I do, I put skills, experiences, and creativity, because creativity is so important in the workplace. And I think that being able to pull from my experiences, now I'm able to work in the Teaching Diversity program, the Civilian Leadership program, Texas Sergeant Academy, School of Police Supervision, School of Executive Leadership. And I'm teaching a yoga class on not only resilience, but maximizing performance potential. And when I talk about maximizing performance potential, I'm talking about people doing the healing work that they need to do to be the best at their job, to be able to reduce biases, to be able to, and mindfulness is great for that. Yoga is great for that. And when I put bodies in the same room, white bodies, black bodies, African American bodies, Asian bodies, everybody, everybody. When I put all the bodies in the room, suddenly they are barefoot on a yoga mat, in shorts and a t-shirt, and suddenly things become different. They're no longer in the uniform. And so that is where the healing work takes place. And I'm using and infusing my experiences to build a class that is going to benefit public professionals, public servants. Um, so that is the career that mirrors the self. Here's a photo of me with law enforcement. I think this was School of Police Supervision last year. I have tons of other pictures, but these are the best ones that I could find for now. So, and I work with children a lot too. I did a boys group, and we did yoga and mindfulness. And funny enough, the kids are they love mindfulness. Kids love yoga. I don't know what it is, but they just apparently think it's like the bee's knees. Feel free to screenshot this slide. I put this together. I know it's a lot of words. I don't want to go into all the words, but I meant it for people to just screenshot and take a look. If you are looking to find a career path that is, you're morally aligned with, that you feel that you can be successful in, and that you can really make an impact, I highly suggest starting with the family history, learning about where you come from, recognizing where privilege exists. Decolonization of our mind bodies is so key, and then to find healing practices. Once we've discovered and we've pulled the rocks and we see what's underneath, now we can begin to heal that and stay curious and allow ourselves to whatever that is for you, if it's therapy, if it's journaling, if it's yoga, whatever it is, going to work out, do all of that, because the sooner you hit rock bottom or whatever you need to go through, the sooner you can start making an impact, and giving yourself that space to have hobbies, and to start projects. And that's what I did with my website, lifeonamat.com. Started that over 5 years ago, and it's something that gives me a creative outlet aside from work, aside from volunteering. But most importantly, I highly recommend that you get a mentor or an advocate in every single space that you can find, whether that's in your academic career or your working career. Find an advocate that can truly help you invest in yourself and tell you things that you need to know that will improve the way you interact with people, give you more emotional intelligence, and just sharpening your speaking skills, or whatever it is that you need to work on. Don't be afraid of criticism, or people telling you that, hey, this is an area that you can improve upon. So this is my last slide. Second to last slide, my work and wellness. So again, I call it a resource hub. Some people call it a blog these days, but I call it a resource hub because there's over 100 posts that I've researched, written, and put out for the public consumption. And I'm very proud of that, because it's just my life's work. It's my legacy, and it's something that I just like to do for fun. And it's always free and open to the public if they want to learn more about yoga and all the tips on mindfulness, lifestyle. You're going to find everything there. Sometimes I like to do makeup, like that's another, just creative, just to be fun and versatile. Again, improving mental health habits for law enforcement. So that is the class that I've created. It's called Maximizing Performance Potential for Law Enforcement. And there are topics outside of yoga and mindfulness that I've included, such as epigenetics, which is the study of how our ancestral genetics the genetics that we have and how we can actually influence our own genetics. Brain and gut health, sleep hygiene, mindfulness. These are all things that are lifestyle that can help implement habits for people to become more resilient. So that's what I like to do. I love anything that's kind of sciencey and about the brain and neuroscience and all of those topics. I kind of fuse it into one class. And I think that it came from my experiences. I know that it came from what happened to me as a child. I know it came from what happened to my family. I know it came from what happened to my ancestry. So again, I think that that helped me to find direction and to find what it is that I like to do. And as a program manager, I do manage programs. I have a whole separate um, set of duties for that. But I got the courage to propose this class to my boss, and my boss said, "Put it together." Present it to me, show me exactly what your lesson plan, what's the curriculum. I had to work for it, but he allowed me to start teaching in the law enforcement schools. And that's why I want to encourage people to, if you have an idea and you think that you can do some good or share a skill set, never be afraid to ask, because you really never know if a person is going to say, you know what, yeah, we actually do need that, and I've been waiting for you to ask me to do that. So I just wanted to encourage people to do that. And the other thing I love is that I bring diversity into the wellness space, which is so needed. So much of what I do is rooted in the discovery of self, in just diversity itself. And yeah, that's really um, that's really it. I'm kind of going off track, and I'm looking at the time, so it's 1:40. But yeah, that's really it. I think hopefully you guys took something from this. And let me go to the very last slide. If you guys have questions, this is my new Instagram. I'm putting together some more content as a branch of lifeonamat.com. You can email me as well. Screenshot this slide here. So that's all I have. And thank you all for having me. And I have some time for questions or just whatever you guys have in mind, if you guys have anything you want to say.
So, round of applause. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for taking the time today to be with us and obviously share a lot of your knowledge and resources. I am going to wait and let people ask some questions in the chat if there are any. However, I do have a question.
Sure.
And we just kind of wait for people to get warmed up.
Yeah.
So you mentioned getting started with genetics and figuring out who you are as a person. Have you or did you do any of the genetic testing? Because I know there's some that you can do, like the DNA and Me or 23andMe, or like the branches that they show. But were you, or would you recommend doing those?
My parents actually did it, and so I know I won't need to do it because they did it. My personal view, I mean, there's still research to be done, I think, because people are saying that if you do it, then they have your medical history, or they can sell it to well, anyways, I enjoyed when my parents got their results, and I thought it was pretty cool. I personally haven't done it, only because I know for a fact that I'm African American. I know for a fact that I'm Filipino, so that's all I need. That's all I need for me to, but I think if you have interest, some people find out a lot of stuff about themselves that wow, I didn't know that I was actually half, Lebanese, or I didn't know I had that much African American. So I think that it's good because it starts a conversation among a lot of people. A lot of families, I think, need to recognize that they have other ethnic backgrounds. So I think it could be really good for people to have conversations and to realize that we're really more alike than different. And I think Adrienne Houghton, she just did a video. She's a cheetah girl. I don't know if anyone knows cheetah girls, but she did a video on YouTube with her family, and they just did it. And I thought that was incredible. So
I have not seen that one. I'm going to have to go look her up.
yeah, I love her. She's
I
the
was
best.
such a Cheetah Girls fan when I was little.
Showing my age.
No, not at all. Same. I was such a big Cheetah Girl fan. It literally was not that long ago.
I loved it. I love her.
So again, if anybody else has any questions, I don't want to take up all this space either. You're more than welcome to raise your hand or put it in the chat. So we do have one question. Danny.
Hey, Jasmine, how you doing?
Hey, I'm
Good
good.
to
How
see
are you?
you.
Good to see you too.
I have a question, if you wouldn't mind talking about this. Given the world that we're seeing, experiencing right now with law enforcement,
Yes.
you can you talk about some of the insight you have from your work? Because you're kind of in a private space with a lot of these
Yeah.
officers, and you're seeing a different side of it, but also the identity part of you being in that space.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, in the classes that we have different programs, and so they come and we have sergeants, we have captains, lieutenants, all kinds of law enforcement in different stages of their career. But I have seen so much, and I'm glad you asked this question, especially in our teaching diversity class. The law enforcement is in a space together where they're actually beginning to have a lot more discussions on how they can fight implicit bias, how they can begin to reduce stereotyping, move more into a community policing methodology. And a lot of these law enforcement, I've seen law enforcement who have a difficult time discussing this issue of race and diversity and what's been happening in the news. But I've seen a lot of law enforcement step up and say, you know, this is a problem. Our communities are hurting, our people are hurting, so we need to have this conversation. And a lot of policing has become very progressive. Of course, you won't see this in the media as much, but I can tell you that in the work that we do, and it's not only on diversity, but I mean, there's so much on leadership and management and servant leadership and um, police administration. There's so many other topics that we cover. But for me, it has been such a healing experience. And I work with my director, Gregory Smith, and he's been at the center for over 20 years. And I highly respect him and so many of the other faculty that we have. We have a wide array of faculty that share their expertise. And getting to see this again connects me back to my identity and what I saw growing up. It was so different for my grandfather. It was so different for my father, for my mom. And so now it has allowed me to kind of feel myself from a cellular level. I am healing because I see that people are being brave and having this conversation. So um, that is another point that I really enjoy and I think is the most rewarding part of the work that we're doing in the Institute. And people are starting to notice that and give us more recognition. Greg has been in the news like every other week. So it's kind of cool to see that we're making an impact in the community and in the law enforcement profession itself. So thank you.
Another question is on mentoring. So what advice or how would you kind of, in this sense, mentor a student to find a mentor or strategies?
Okay, strategies. I got a lot for you on that. Actually, I'm a big believer that the mentor that you choose first, it's important to have a mentor not only in your academic career if possible, but also obviously in your professional career. I highly recommend finding a mentor who has had some similar experiences as you, only because I realize now when I was in my early 20s, I'm 31 now, but when I was younger, you know, not all of the advice applies to you that you would get, that they would give to someone else. So when people say, just lean in, just be the change you want to see, just fake it till you make it. Some of that advice is very dangerous for people of color. Okay. Some of that is violent for people of color. So I think it's very important that we can't use a cookie cutter approach. And again, the mentor doesn't have to be the same race as you. They don't have to have the same ethnic background. I'm just simply saying that I wish I had known. I wish I had leaned on people who had had some of the similar experiences as me, so that way they could speak from a real standpoint. And I have a mentor, and we had a conversation just 2 days ago. She came and we had a 2-hour talk, and she said, you know, I'm going to give you unpopular advice, you know, but I would be irresponsible if I gave you just the generic advice. So here's my advice. And it was very transformative for me. It's advice that I didn't want to hear. But again, I don't think that someone that's not like her in her experience would tell me the truth about things. So, and having advocates. So mentor is someone that you can check in with. And when you reach out to a mentor, ask them, hey, can I come to you every quarter? Tell them how often you want to meet with them, how long you want to meet with them, how much time is it going to require for them. So that way they know that, okay, this isn't just going to be a weekly, therapy session. It's more of like constructive criticism or constructive feedback is what I'll say. And you can also start an advisory board. If you can't find mentors, like people who are in your industry or field, start an advisory board. It's 2 or 3 people, maybe similar in age, it could be older, it could be younger, that you trust, that would give you good advice. And then that's your advisory board, and you say, we're all just going to encourage each other, we're going to support each other, we're going to have this a group meeting once every quarter, and then you create your own advisory board. And sometimes 3 heads are better than 1. It may not be someone in your industry, but it could be somebody that can support you, and hold space for you. So that would be my advice on mentors.
Thank you so much. Again, I want to give space if anybody wants to raise their hand and ask questions as well, so that I can see them pop up. But another question, and this one is a little more on wellness. So how did you go about getting into wellness and then being that representation? As you mentioned, a lot of minorities don't maybe have as much access or have as many resources to find people who, again, like you said, have similar experiences. So kind of emphasize a little more on wellness for minoritized communities.
Yes, absolutely. So wellness for us looks very different. And now we are moving into a space where wellness is, even the healthcare and wellness, mindfulness, all of these therapies are becoming decolonized. And so for me, first I got into wellness because I had a lot of depression when I first graduated. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was going through struggles. We all kind of go through that. Of course, we think we're the only ones at the time, but a close friend to me told me one day, she kind of called me out and said, hey, look, I think this is the issue that you need to work on. And that kind of catapulted me to become very curious. So if you are curious about yourself, that means you care about yourself. And I recommend people to become curious about revolving issues that percolate. What you resist persists, as they say. So walk towards things that are uncomfortable, and that's what I had to do. I had to get some help, and my mom suggested that I try yoga. So in 2011, I went to my first yoga class, and that was like, it's healing work on the body. It's somatically healing not only my mind, but it's more than just therapy for me. It was like, okay, now my body's able to finally release some of that stress, because the body needs to release. The blood needs to circulate. So that's how I got into yoga, was through my mom. She encouraged me, and then I kept practicing. And so as far as access to wellness, we do have so many resources popping up. I see it all the time on social media and yoga classes. I'm a firm believer that if you open yourself to, when you have questions that you need answers to, the mind will begin to see things a little bit more. So keeping a list of like, what are the things you want to work on, and doing the research. And I can talk to people on a sidebar if they're looking, but I, again, lean on my my peers, especially my Black and Asian and Latinx peers. And I ask them, hey, can you give me a list of Black therapists? Do you have a list of, yoga classes I can go to on a Saturday? Eventbrite is really good for that. Typing in free yoga classes, free therapy, massage is very good. Self-care is so important. So I think that it's taking the time to research, finding the events that are taking place, paying for the yoga class, signing up for the yoga class. A lot of times we don't want to put the name and the email and the payment information. Just do it. Just get there. And I think that's important. But looking up people in those specific industries that you're looking to do. So if you need therapy and you want to have a little bit more personalized therapy, go through your insurance. I think a lot of it is taking the time to set up the appointment and set up the class, because there is a lot out there for us. We just have to utilize the resource. And by doing that, you're supporting Black-owned businesses, Asian-owned businesses, Latinx. You're supporting us by reaching out to us. So hopefully that answers a question. Hopefully it wasn't too vague.
No, thank you. We do have a hand raised right now, so if you would like to unmute yourself and ask, please.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Just bear with me for just a second. Sorry, I have a bit of a stuffy nose, but so listening to your presentation and stuff, it got me thinking about my own multi-ethnic identity, and I sort of had a realization, and I kind of want to see if you relate. But growing up, you talked about how other kids didn't have the tools to sort of interact with you.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up, because of that, I was always very, very close with my siblings, because my siblings were sort of the only people in my proximity that looked like me.
Yes.
That shared some of those features. And I kind of like listened to your stuff, it unlocked a little bit. I was like, oh, maybe that's why I've always had such a strong bond with my siblings, whereas some other people that I met are like, I hate my siblings and stuff. I'm like, I can't relate to that.
Right.
But that's all. Just, I mean, seeing if you relate to that.
Yeah. Let me tell you, I can definitely relate. And that's what you call a trauma bond, because a lot of times what happens is, and my brother and I are very close too. And we had another set of friends who were both Black and Filipino, and they were sisters, and they literally, you could not separate them. And it was to the point where the teachers were concerned because they would not separate in school and they wouldn't socialize with anybody. But it was because what I think that when we talk about resources and tools, I don't think that people really understood that it's painful to separate what is helpful to them. It's violent to actually separate people from safety, because when they're together, it's a safety. It's a feeling of, okay, I can trust that I know my siblings know what we all go through, the same thing. So when you separate us, or when people look at you and they say, why are you guys always together? Or like, go live your own, why aren't you independent? Because we come from a collective culture and not an individualistic culture. In my culture specifically, or cultures, we're very family, close knit. We go everywhere together. Like, if you see, even in Hispanic families, my niece is Vietnamese, Hispanic, Black, and Filipino. And on her mom's side, they're always together. Like, if they're going to go to the grocery store, they go all together. If they go to the mall, they all go together. And that's like something that I think there's a protection, is like a halo around, the world of being judged, of feeling that, if we step outside of this halo, then we go out into the world. And there's a show called Mixed-ish, and Tracy Ellis Ross talks about that. She goes, my parents sent us into the world unprepared, and we didn't know. We just, like, they're all huddled together like this, like trying to go through the issues of being in the American school system. Yeah, but I definitely can relate with you, and I'm glad that it kind of touched a nerve, because you getting information about those experiences, and you, after all, it's like, oh, I wasn't weird. Like, I was doing that out of survival. I was doing that because the body, the brain is like that fight or flight. And so when our nervous system is engaged, we tend to want to protect ourselves. We want to run to safety. And so family and close friends and neighbors, people that you grew up with, that's why when people, and they marry their high school sweetheart from, like, they knew them from, like, a lot of times it's because they went through the same things, or they knew they were in the same town. So I definitely can relate. And I will say, a lot of Black and Asian kids, there's so many of us on Instagram, we all follow each other. We don't know each other personally, but we all follow each other because we have that same experience of just being Asian and Black. And so, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it definitely brings up memories for me.
Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
I think I saw another hand as well. They might have already put it down, but I want to just make sure again. leave some space for them to ask questions. We've got about 5 more minutes until 1, so I want to, again, be conscious of time and questions.
I will just say too on that, when I mentioned Trevor and Kendall, we were all friends. Again, it was that same thing, that trauma bond of like going through that. And that's why I brought that up in that slide of like, I remember when we all met each other in 8th grade, it was like, like we're all together now, we're friends. You know, you meet someone that's like you, or you see someone that's like you. It's a nice feeling, you know. So anyways, cool. I'm glad we're ending right on time because I was worried I was going to go over.
No, you're fine. You're fine. If we do not have any last minute questions, I will go forward for some announcements and resources. Okay. So the Multicultural Center actually has programmings and a group for people who are also multiracial. So I just want to make sure that you all know that as a resource, and also Jasmine, in the case that you ever want to be that mentor or be a resource to those students as well, I just want to make sure that you all now know, or if you didn't know, that we do have a space for our multiracial students on campus. But that is all my announcement that I have for you all. And again, if you can, unmute yourself if you would like. Give a round of applause to our speaker today. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.